Before we dive into the story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more heart-touching tales. Wishing you a beautiful day now. Sit back and enjoy the story. The crystal tumbler exploded against the marble wall of the penthouse. Amber liquid streaking down like tears of expensive whiskey. Alexander Blackwood watched the destruction with cold satisfaction before turning to face his father, who sat unmoved behind the mahogany desk that had commanded boardrooms for 3 decades. An arranged marriage, Alexander repeated, his voice carrying the same lethal quiet that had made oil barons sweat across negotiation tables. Have you completely lost your mind? William Blackwood adjusted his Patek Philippe watch with practiced indifference, the gesture more calculated than casual. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittered 70 floors below like the empire it was. His empire, or at least it had been until this moment. The Thompsons are about to acquire PathTech, William stated, his tone as flat as a weather report. If they succeed, they'll control 40% of the medical technology sector. This marriage secures our position. Their daughter for 20% of our shares and exclusive distribution rights. The board voted unanimously. Alexander ran his hand through his dark hair, destroying the perfect styling that cost him $500 at his private barber. The motion was uncharacteristic, a crack in his armor that his father noted with interest. I don't care if they voted to canonize me as a saint. I'm not marrying some mousy accountant just because her daddy owns a few patents. William's thin smile never reached his eyes. He slid a manila folder across the glass coffee table between them. Olivia Thompson graduated summa cum laude from MIT. She's their chief innovation officer and holds 16 patents herself. Hardly mousy. The folder hit the table with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the vast space. Alexander stared at it as if it contained a death sentence, which, in many ways, it did. The agreement has been finalized, William continued. The wedding is in 6 weeks. Against his better judgment, Alexander flipped open the folder. He'd expected to find some plain-faced corporate drone, the kind of woman who wore sensible shoes and carried briefcases instead of purses. Instead, he found himself staring at an elegant woman with piercing green eyes and a subtle smirk that suggested she knew things others didn't. Her auburn hair caught light like fire, and even in the professional headshot there was something untamed about her that made his pulse quicken. Fine, he snapped, masking his surprise behind practiced arrogance. I'll marry her. She'll be properly grateful for the privilege of becoming a Blackwood, I assume? Just another acquisition to add to the portfolio? For the first time that evening, William chuckled. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with military precision. What I thought you'd say? He paused at the door, his hand on the brass handle. One piece of advice, son. I've met Olivia Thompson. Don't underestimate her. As his father left, Alexander poured another drink from the crystal decanter that had somehow survived his earlier tantrum. He gazed out at his city, watching the lights twinkle like captured stars. He had brokered billion-dollar deals while skydiving. It brought companies to their knees with a single phone call. He had dated supermodels and actresses who adored his every move. How hard could it be to manage one corporate princess? 3,000 miles away, Olivia Thompson slammed her laptop shut with enough force to make her assistant jump. The sound echoed through the Thompson Technologies executive lounge, 60 floors above San Francisco Bay, where the fog was already beginning to roll in from the Pacific. They're announcing it tomorrow without even consulting me about the press release, she said, her voice tight with controlled fury. Her father, Charles Thompson, didn't look up from his tablet. At 62, he had perfected the art of appearing calm while orchestrating corporate warfare. The agreement specified a joint announcement on the 15th. The Blackwoods are simply adhering to the timeline. The agreement also stated I would review all communications. Olivia rose from her chair, her movement sharp and predatory. The sunset cast her shadow long across the polished concrete floor. This isn't just some merger document we're talking about, Dad. It's my life. It's business, Olivia. The biggest deal we've ever made. Charles finally looked up, his expression softening slightly. In the golden light, She could see traces of the father who had taught her to code when she was 8, who had believed in her when the rest of Silicon Valley had written her off as just another pretty face in the boys' club. Alexander Blackwood is one of the most eligible bachelors in the country, he offered weakly. He's also arrogant, impulsive, and treats women like luxury cars. Trade in for a new model every year. Olivia began to pace, her heels clicking rhythmically against the floor. Have you seen the tabloids? Charles shrugged. I've seen our stock projections after this merger. PathTech will revolutionize personalized medicine, but we need Blackwood's distribution network and capital. Olivia stopped at the window, watching the fog roll across the Golden Gate Bridge like a living thing. The city below was beginning to sparkle as office buildings transformed into towers of light. She had worked her entire life to be taken seriously. In this industry, fighting for every patent, every promotion, every moment of respect, now she was just currency in a corporate transaction. I've worked my entire life to be taken seriously in this industry, she said quietly. Now I'm just currency in a corporate transaction. No, Charles said firmly, joining her at the window. You're the only person I trust to ensure the Blackwoods don't swallow us whole once they have access to our technology. He placed a hand on her shoulder, the gesture both paternal and calculating. Alexander expects a compliant, grateful wife who will stand quietly by his side at galas. A slow smile spread across Olivia's face, transforming her features from beautiful to dangerous. In that moment, she looked exactly like her father when he was about to destroy a competitor. Then Alexander Blackwood is in for a rather unpleasant surprise. Later that night, as her private jet crossed the country toward New York, Olivia scrolled through images of her future husband on her tablet. In every photo, Alexander Blackwood looked like he owned the world. Confident, commanding, coldly handsome, in tailored suits worth more than most people's cars. She zoomed in on his steel blue eyes and the hint of cruelty in his smile. Men like him expected the world to bend to their will. Men like him had underestimated her for her entire career. Olivia opened her notebook and began to write. Not wedding. Vows, but strategies. If Alexander Blackwood thought she was walking into his life to play the role of decorative corporate wife, he was about to discover just how wrong he could be. As the plane descended toward the glittering Manhattan skyline, Olivia felt a thrill of anticipation she hadn't experienced since her first patent approval. She hadn't asked for this arranged marriage, but she would certainly make the most of it. Game on, Mr. Blackwood. Game on. The Blackwood Foundation Charity Gala transformed the Metropolitan Museum of Art into a playground for New York's elite. Champagne flowed like water, diamonds sparkled under crystal chandeliers, and billion-dollar deals were casually brokered. Between con-ups, the air hummed with the electricity of power and money, thick enough to taste. Alexander Blackwood stood at the center of it all, glass of 30-year-old Macallan in one hand, the other tucked casually in the pocket of his Tom Ford tuxedo. A circle of admirers laughed at his every word, their faces bright with the desperate hunger of those seeking favor from Manhattan royalty. Tonight should have been perfect, except for the ticking clock in his head. In exactly 17 minutes, according to the meticulously arranged schedule, he would be officially introduced to his fiancée. So this arranged marriage thing, Ryan? Miller, Alexander's oldest friend and the only person who dared tease him, leaned closer with a conspiratorial grin. Is it like ordering a bride from a catalog? Or more of a blind date with lawyers present? Alexander's smile never faltered, though his grip tightened almost imperceptibly on his glass. It's more like a hostile takeover with a wedding cake. Heard she's brilliant, offered Sophia Chen, a venture capitalist who had once briefly dated Alexander before realizing he collected women like art pieces, MIT, multiple patents, trilingual. Wonderful, Alexander drawled, his voice dripping. With practiced charm. We can discuss thermodynamics on our honeymoon. The crowd tittered appreciatively, but their laughter faded as Alexander's gaze shifted to the grand staircase. The entire room seemed to still, conversations dropping to whispers as if someone had dimmed the volume on the party itself. Olivia Thompson descended the stairs like she was walking into a boardroom, not a ballroom. Her emerald gown was elegant but understated. It's a kind of dress that cost a fortune precisely because it didn't scream its price tag, Her jewelry was minimal, but flawless. No princess curls or girlish blush. Her dark auburn hair was swept into a sleek chignon, her makeup emphasizing the sharp intelligence in her green eyes. She moved with the confident grace of someone who had never doubted her place in the world, even when the world had tried to convince her otherwise. Alexander felt an unexpected jolt of something he couldn't immediately identify. Interest. Challenge. Whatever it was, he quickly suppressed it beneath his practiced charm. He excused himself from his entourage and crossed the marble floor, aware that hundreds of eyes were watching this first meeting like spectators at a gladiator match. As he approached, he noticed Olivia scanning the room not with wide-eyed wonder, but with the calculated assessment of someone mapping territory for conquest. Ms. Thompson. He extended his hand with his most dazzling smile, the one that had graced magazine covers and melted countless hearts. Welcome to New York. I'm Alexander Blackwood. Olivia's handshake was firm, professional, no nervous flutter, no awestruck smile. Her skin was warm against his, calloused in a way that spoke of real work rather than tennis lessons and spa treatments. Mr. Blackwood, I assumed you'd be the one with the largest crowd of sycophants. Thank you for confirming. Alexander's smile froze for a microsecond before he recovered, though he felt something shift in his chest like a tectonic plate finding new ground. I see you've brought your sense of humor cross-country. Delightful. Oh, this isn't my humor. This is just my baseline observation. Her smile was sweet enough to pass social muster, but her eyes remained coolly assessing. Your father mentioned you'd show me around, introduce me to important people. I assume that means anyone with a net worth over 8 figures? He leaned closer, his voice dropping to ensure only she could hear. The scent of her perfume was subtle, expensive, with an undertone of something uniquely hers that made his pulse quicken despite himself. I thought we might at least pretend to enjoy each other's company for the cameras. Is pretending your specialty, Mr. Blackwood? How fitting for a man whose company promises authentic luxury experiences. She took a champagne flute from a passing waiter without breaking eye contact. Shall we begin our performance? For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Alexander Blackwood felt off balance. This woman wasn't following the script. She wasn't deferring to his wealth, his looks, or his name. In fact, she seemed completely immune to the charm that had smoothed his path through life, like oil on troubled waters. By all means, he offered, his arm with exaggerated gallantry. Let me introduce you to my world. Temporarily half your world, according to the merger agreement, she corrected, placing her hand lightly on his sleeve. Her touch burned through the expensive fabric. Section 12, paragraph 3. As they moved through the crowd, Alexander maintained his public smile while recalibrating every assumption he'd made. Olivia Thompson greeted board members and celebrities with the same measured poise, neither starstruck nor dismissive. She asked pointed questions about charitable initiatives that made several foundation directors squirm. She spoke fluent Japanese to a visiting tech magnate, negotiated a reduced rate with the museum director for using their labs for children's science programs, and somehow convinced the notoriously reclusive fashion designer Eliza Winters to consider creating lab coats specifically designed for women scientists. Quite the social butterfly, Alexander murmured, as they shared a momentary reprieve near a Greek statue of Athena, goddess of wisdom and warfare. The irony wasn't lost on him. I did my research, only on the ones worth knowing. Olivia sipped her champagne, her lipstick leaving no trace on the crystal rim. Isn't that what these events are for? Or did you think I'd just smile and compliment? Everyone's jewelry? Most people come to my galas to enjoy themselves. Most people don't have their marriages arranged via corporate merger, she countered smoothly. Would you prefer I swoon every time you enter my field of vision? Perhaps giggle at your jokes while gazing adoringly at your jawline? My jawline is widely considered exceptional, he deadpanned, surprised to find himself actually enjoying their verbal sparring match. For the first time that evening, Olivia's smile reached her eyes, transforming her face from merely beautiful to luminous. A triumph of genetics rather than personal achievement, but I'll note your pride in it. A photographer approached, requesting a photo of the newly engaged couple. Without discussion, they shifted seamlessly into position, his arm around her. waist, her body turned slightly toward his, both wearing camera-ready smiles that revealed nothing of their conversation. Her body fit against his with surprising rightness, warm and real in a way that made his carefully constructed walls tremble. "Perfect," the photographer exclaimed. "You look like you were made for each other." Downed as the photographer walked away, Olivia murmured, "Remarkable how convincing artifice can be." Alexander glanced down at her, suddenly curious about the woman beneath the armor. "Is everything a strategic calculation with you, Miss Thompson?" says the man who's valued me entirely by my company's market share and patent portfolio. Met his gaze directly, and he saw something flicker there. Hurt, perhaps, quickly masked by steel. "We're both playing parts, Mr. Blackwood. Let's not pretend otherwise." Before he could respond, William Blackwood appeared, clapping his son on the shoulder with the enthusiasm of a man closing a particularly lucrative deal. "There's my boy and his beautiful fiancée. Charles just called from San Francisco. He's delighted by the photos. The PR team has already released them." "Wonderful," Alexander and Olivia replied in perfect, empty unison. "The foundation board wants to make a toast," William continued, his eyes bright with satisfaction. "Public celebration of the engagement." As they followed William toward the stage, Alexander leaned close to Olivia's ear, close enough to feel the warmth of her skin. "Ready for Act Two?" "I was born ready," she replied, and for a fleeting moment, Alexander believed her completely. More than that, he found himself hoping she meant it. Perfection was the only acceptable standard. "And I suppose Thompson Technologies isn't contributing to these renovations, or contributing the technology that will make the renovations profitable?" Olivia smiled with professional sweetness. "That could have frosted windows. Section 15 of our agreement clearly places facility responsibility with the distribution partner." "How convenient that you remember the sections that benefit your side. Remember all the sections, Mr. Blackwood. Perhaps you should try reading the full agreement rather than just the highlights your assistant prepared." A muffled snicker from someone on the Thompson side of the table was quickly disguised as a cough when Alexander's cold gaze swept the room. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Fine," he conceded with feigned magnanimity, though his jaw clenched almost imperceptibly. "We'll implement version 2 of your proposal. It's not because it's necessary, but because I'm feeling generous toward my future bride." Olivia's eyes narrowed fractionally, the only sign that his condescension had hit its mark. "How chivalrous. While you're feeling so generous, shall we discuss the clinical trial data sharing protocols?" Alexander checked his Rolex with exaggerated precision. "Unfortunately, I have another meeting. Why don't we continue this delightful exchange over dinner tonight, 7:30, my penthouse?" It wasn't a request, and everyone in the room knew it. The executives shifted uncomfortably, witnessing a power play disguised as a dinner invitation. Olivia closed her laptop with deliberate calm. "I have plans this evening. Cancel them." "That's not how this works," she replied coolly, her voice carrying the same authority that had silenced MIT lecture halls. "But I could do lunch tomorrow at Thompson's New York office." Their eyes locked in silent challenge. The air in the room seemed to crackle with tension, to forces of nature colliding in slow motion. "Chef Raymond doesn't do lunch service," Alexander finally said, naming the most exclusive private chef in Manhattan. 7:30 then. "I'll send a car. I'll drive myself. I prefer to control my own arrivals and departures." As the meeting dispersed, Alexander's CFO approached him cautiously. The older man had worked for the Blackwood family for 15 years and had learned to read the warning signs. "That was interesting," he ventured. "She's stubborn," Alexander muttered, watching Olivia confer with her team across the room. Even from a distance, he could see the way her colleagues deferred to her intelligence, seeking her approval with the same hunger his own employees showed him. "She's right," the CFO replied quietly. "About the distribution centers. Our quality control reports have flagged the same issues for months." Alexander shot him a betrayed look. "Whose side are you on? The side that doesn't get sued when medical? Equipment fails because we cut corners on storage." That evening, Olivia stood in Alexander's penthouse, studying the view of Manhattan that stretched out like a glittering carpet of ambition. She'd arrived precisely on time, neither early enough to seem eager nor late enough to be rude. Her black dress was sophisticated but not seductive, her jewelry minimal but expensive. Every choice calculated to send a message: I belong in your world, but I'm not impressed by it. You have excellent taste in real estate, she said without turning around as Alexander approached with 2 glasses of wine. Location is everything in Manhattan, he replied, offering her a glass of something that probably costs more than most people's monthly salary. Though I suspect you already researched the building before agreeing to come. Built in 1987, renovated. In 2019, 47 floors, private elevator access to the penthouse. She accepted the wine and turned to face him. You paid $18 million for it in 2021, though I suspect it's worth considerably more now. Most women comment on the view. Not most women, Mr. Blackwood. I thought we'd established that. They moved to the dining room, where Chef Raymond had prepared a meal that could have graced the cover of a culinary magazine. The conversation flowed with the same careful precision as their business negotiations, each testing the other's boundaries, searching for weaknesses. Tell me about your patents, Alexander said over the second course, genuinely curious, despite himself. Olivia's fork paused halfway to her lips. Which ones? The ones that made you worth 20% of my family's company. For a moment, her professional mask slipped, revealing something raw underneath. You mean the ones that could revolutionize treatment for autoimmune diseases? Or the ones that might cure certain types of cancer within the next decade? The passion in her voice was unmistakable, transforming her from corporate strategist to visionary scientist. Alexander found himself leaning forward, drawn by the fire in her eyes. The cancer research, he said quietly. Targeted gene therapy using programmable nanoparticles. Her hands moved as she spoke, painting pictures in the air. We can essentially reprogram cells at the molecular level, teaching them to recognize and destroy cancer while leaving healthy tissue untouched. And it works? In 93% of lab trials? We start human testing next year, assuming we can secure proper distribution channels and regulatory approval. The weight of what she was saying settled over him. This wasn't just about corporate mergers or family dynasties. This was about saving lives on a scale that could reshape medicine itself. Why didn't you tell me this before? Olivia's expression hardened again, the vulnerable scientist disappearing behind armor. Would it have mattered, or would you have just seen dollar signs? The question hung between them like a challenge. Alexander realized he didn't know the answer, and that uncertainty disturbed him more than he cared to admit. Maybe both, he said finally, offering her the honesty she seemed to demand. Something shifted in her eyes, a crack in the ice. At least you're honest about your greed. You're honest about your contempt. I don't contempt you, she said. Quietly, and for the first time since they'd met, her voice carried no strategic calculation. I contempt what you represent. The assumption that everything has a price, that everyone can be bought. Can't they? The question was barely a whisper, but it seemed to echo in the vast space of his penthouse. Olivia set down her wine glass, her movement deliberate and final. Some things are worth more than money, Alexander. Some things are worth more than power. She stood, gathering her purse with the same precision she brought to everything else. Thank you for dinner, for the honest conversation. As she moved toward the door, Alexander found himself standing, driven by an impulse he didn't understand. Olivia. She paused, her hand on the door handle, but didn't turn around. The distribution center upgrades. I'll approve the full proposal. Tomorrow, now she did turn, studying his face with those penetrating green eyes. Why? Because you're right. And because maybe some things are worth more than the quarterly profit margins. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Across the expanse of his perfectly appointed apartment, then Olivia nodded once, a gesture that somehow felt like a truce. Good night, Alexander. After she left, Alexander stood alone in his penthouse, surrounded by the fruits of his ambition. But for the first time in his carefully orchestrated life, he wondered if he'd been measuring success with the wrong metrics entirely. The call came at 3 in the morning, jarring Alexander from the first peaceful sleep he'd had in weeks. Through the fog of exhaustion, he heard his father's voice, sharp with an urgency that William Blackwood rarely allowed himself to show. Turn. On Channel 7. Now. Alexander stumbled to his living room, fumbling for the remote with fingers that suddenly felt clumsy. The massive television screen flickered to life, revealing a breaking news report that made his blood turn to ice. Thompson Technologies under federal investigation for alleged patent theft and fraudulent research claims. The anchor announced with the clinical detachment of someone delivering other people's disasters. Sources close to the FDA suggest that several of the company's groundbreaking medical patents may have been stolen from rival firms. The screen filled with footage of FBI agents carrying boxes from Thompson's San Francisco headquarters. Charles Thompson emerged from the building in handcuffs, his face grim but defiant. And there, standing beside him, was Olivia. She looked smaller on television, more vulnerable than she'd ever appeared in person. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face free of makeup. Wearing jeans and a Stanford sweatshirt, as if the FBI had caught her in the middle of a late night work session, which Alexander realized they probably had. The engagement between Olivia Thompson and Alexander. Blackwood raises questions about whether this was an elaborate scheme to steal Blackwood proprietary technology. The reporter continued. Industry experts are calling it the most sophisticated corporate espionage operation in decades. Xander's phone buzzed with notifications. Missed calls from board members, frantic texts from his PR team, emails from reporters demanding comment. The carefully constructed merger that was supposed to secure the Blackwood Empire's future was crumbling in real time, staking his reputation. With it, his father's voice came through the phone speaker, cold with controlled fury. The board is meeting in 2 hours. They want answers, and they want distance from the Thompson situation. Immediately, Dad, this could be a setup.
What?
Trying to destroy the merger by framing them. Does it matter? William's laugh was bitter. The perception is reality in our world, Alexander. You know that? Alexander did know that. He'd built his career on understanding the delicate balance between truth and public image. But as he watched Olivia walk toward the waiting FBI sedan, with her head held high, he found himself caring more about the truth than the perception for the first time in his adult life. I'm going to San Francisco, he said. You absolutely are not. You're going to issue a statement condemning the Thompson family's alleged crimes and announcing the immediate termination of your engagement. Our lawyers are already drafting it. Alexander ended the call without responding. He was already moving toward his bedroom, throwing clothes into a suitcase with the same urgency that had once driven him to close billion-dollar deals. But this wasn't about money or power or market share. This was about the woman who had challenged him, intrigued him, and somehow begun to matter more than his carefully guarded heart wanted to admit. The flight to San Francisco felt endless. Alexander spent the hours reading everything he could find about the investigation, tracing the web of accusations and counter-accusations that had ensnared Thompson Technologies. The deeper he dug, the more complex the story became. Patents filed simultaneously by different companies, research data that appeared in multiple laboratories, accusations flying in all directions like shrapnel from an explosion. By the time his plane touched down at SFO, the story had evolved. Thompson Technologies was claiming they were the victims of an elaborate frame job, pointing to suspicious timing and anonymous tips that had triggered the investigation. Their lawyers were calling it corporate sabotage, designed to destroy the merger and eliminate Thompson as a competitor in the medical technology sector. Alexander found Olivia at her company's backup offices in Palo Alto, a converted warehouse that hummed with the quiet intensity of programmers and researchers working around the clock. She stood in the center of the controlled chaos, directing damage control efforts with the same precision she brought to corporate negotiations. She looked up as he approached, her face cycling through surprise, relief, and something that might have been hope before settling on guarded professionalism. Alexander, I didn't expect to see you here. I didn't expect to be here, he admitted. Around them, her team continued their work, but he could feel their eyes on him, measuring whether he was friend or enemy. Is there somewhere we can talk? Privately? She'll led him to a small conference room with whiteboards covered in molecular diagrams and project timelines. Through the glass walls, he could see her employees watching them with the protective intensity of people defending their pack leader. "How bad is it?" he asked without preamble. Olivia sank into a chair, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked exhausted. The armor of invincibility had cracked, revealing the human being underneath. "Bad. They've frozen our assets, suspended our FDA applications, and launched investigations into every patent we've filed in the past 5 years." She rubbed her temples, a gesture so vulnerable it made his chest tighten. 15 years of work. Alexander, 15 years of research that could save millions of lives, and they're treating it like a criminal enterprise. "Did you steal the patents?" The question hung in the air between them like a blade. Olivia's head snapped up, her green eyes flashing with the fire he'd come to recognize as her most dangerous emotion. "Is that what you really think of me?" "I think someone with your intelligence could steal patents in ways that would be almost impossible to detect," he said carefully. "I also think someone with your moral compass would never sacrifice people's lives for corporate gain." She studied his face, as if she were trying to decode a complex equation. "Which do you believe?" "Believe you're innocent. I also believe someone very powerful wants you to look guilty." Relief flickered across her features before being quickly suppressed. "Your father called mine. The merger is dead. The engagement is over. You're supposed to be issuing a statement condemning us as criminals. My father calls a lot of people. I don't always listen." "Alexander." Her voice carried a warning. "Your company's stock has already dropped 12% since the news broke. Staying associated with us will destroy everything your family has built. Maybe some things are worth more than stock prices." The words seemed to echo his earlier conversation with her, when she'd challenged him about the value of human life versus profit margins. Now he was the one making the argument for principles over pragmatism. Olivia leaned back in her chair, studying him with new eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I believe in what you're doing here, and I'm not walking away just because it's dangerous. It's more than dangerous. It's career suicide. Your father will disown you. Your board will revolt. Everything you've worked for will be gone." Alexander thought about his penthouse overlooking Manhattan. His perfectly ordered life, his reputation as the golden prince of American capitalism. Then he thought about Olivia's passionate description of cancer research, the fire in her eyes when she talked about saving lives, the way she'd stood up to him when everyone else had simply agreed. "Then I guess I'll have to build something new." Silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of a decision that would reshape both their lives. Outside the conference room, Olivia's team continued their work, fighting to save research that could change the world. "There's something else," Olivia said quietly. "Something I haven't told you." Alexander felt his stomach drop. "What? I know who's framing us. I know who orchestrated this whole thing." Her hands clenched into fists on the table. "It's someone who has access to both our companies, someone who understood exactly how to make the evidence look convincing." "Who?" "Your father's business partner, Marcus Webb." The name hit Alexander like a physical blow. Marcus Webb had been William's closest friend and business associate for over 20 years. He was Alexander's godfather, the man who had taught him to play chess and given him his first lessons in corporate strategy. That's impossible. Webb Industries filed 3 patents last month that are nearly identical to research Thompson completed 2 years ago. Research that was never published, never shared outside our secure servers. Olivia's voice was steady, but he could see the betrayal in her eyes. The only way he could have accessed that information was through the merger documents your father shared with him. Alexander felt his world shifting on its axis. Everything he'd believed about loyalty, family, trust began to crumble like a house built on sand. Why would Uncle Marcus destroy both our companies? Because together, we're a threat to his biotech empire. Separately, we're just competitors he can destroy one at a time. Olivia pulled out a tablet, showing him financial records and communication logs. He's been positioning himself to acquire both companies at fire sale prices once the investigation destroys our credibility. Alexander stared at the evidence, seeing the careful orchestration of their downfall laid out in spreadsheets and email timestamps. Marcus Webb had played them all like pieces on a chessboard, using their own ambitions against them. He knew about the merger before it was announced, Alexander said slowly, the pieces falling into place. He knew exactly which patents to steal and when to trigger the investigation for maximum damage. And he knew you'd walk away the moment things got difficult, Olivia added, her voice carrying old hurt. He counted on your reputation mattering. More than the truth, the accusation stung because it was accurate. A week ago, Alexander would have done exactly what Webb expected. He would have issued the statement, distanced himself from the scandal, and protected his empire at any cost. But a week ago, hadn't known what it felt like to watch someone he cared about fight for something bigger than profit margins. What? Do we need to prove it? Olivia's eyes widened slightly. You said Webb had access to the merger documents? It means there's a paper trail on our end too. Financial records, communication logs, meeting schedules. Alexander felt the familiar thrill of a complex problem demanding solution. Gosh. If we can establish the timeline and show how he positioned himself to benefit from our destruction, we can expose the whole scheme. Alexander, if we're wrong about this, if we can't prove it, both our companies are finished. Your reputation, your family's legacy, everything will be destroyed. He looked at her across the small conference room, this brilliant woman who had challenged him to be better than his worst instincts. Through the glass walls, he could see her team working tirelessly to save research that could revolutionize medicine. In her eyes, he saw the same fire that had first captivated him at the charity gala. But now it was tempered with something else, trust, not in his money or his power, but in him as a person willing to do the right thing regardless of the cost. Some things are worth more than reputation, he said, echoing her words from their dinner. Some things are worth more than money or power. For the first time since the FBI had raided her company, Olivia smiled. It wasn't her practiced corporate smile, or her calculated social expression. It was real, transforming her face with genuine warmth and hope. Then let's destroy the bastard who tried to destroy us. As they began to plan their counterattack, Alexander realized he was about to risk everything he'd spent his life building. His father would never forgive him. The board would try to remove him. His carefully constructed world would come crashing down. But looking at Olivia, seeing the determination in her eyes and feeling the rightness of fighting beside her rather than against her, Alexander discovered something he'd never expected. He didn't care about any of it, not if it meant standing up for something that actually mattered. The war for their future was about to begin. For the first time in his privileged life, Alexander Blackwood was fighting for more than just victory. He was fighting for justice, for truth, and for the woman who had shown him what those words actually meant. The federal courthouse in Manhattan buzzed with the energy of reporters, lawyers and spectators drawn to what the media had dubbed the trial of the century. 3 months after Alexander had walked away from his privileged life to fight beside Olivia, their battle for justice had culminated in a criminal trial that would determine the fate of 3 corporate empires. Alexander adjusted his tie as he sat in the gallery, wearing a suit that cost less than his usual dinner tabs, but felt more right than anything he'd ever worn. Beside him, Olivia reviewed her notes one final time, her hands steady, despite the magnitude of what they were about to face. The months since San Francisco had transformed them both. Alexander had been removed from Blackwood Enterprises' board by a vote of no confidence, his father cutting him off financially and personally with the cold precision of a surgeon removing diseased tissue. Olivia's company remained under federal scrutiny, her assets frozen, her life's work suspended while investigators sorted truth from lies, but they'd found the evidence. Working 18-hour days in Olivia's converted warehouse, they'd traced every transaction, analyzed every communication, built an unshakable case against Marcus Webb. More than that, it found something neither had expected when this arranged marriage began. They'd found each other. All rise. The Honorable Judge Patricia Martinez presiding. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Martinez took her seat. 62, she had a reputation for brilliance and impatience with lawyers who wasted her time. Today she would hear the evidence that could send Marcus Webb to federal prison and restore Thompson Technologies' reputation. Mr. Peterson, call your first witness. The federal prosecutor stood, his expression grim with the weight of a case that had consumed his office for months. Your Honor, the people call Dr. Olivia Thompson. Alexander watched Olivia walk to the witness stand with the same confidence she'd shown at that first charity gala. She wore a simple black suit, her hair pulled back in a professional chignon. Every inch the brilliant scientist rather than the corporate player everyone had tried to make her. Under Peterson's careful questioning, Olivia laid out the timeline of Thompson Technologies' research, the security protocols that protected their data, and the impossibility of outside access without inside help. Her voice remained steady as she described watching 15 years of work branded as criminal enterprise. Her reputation destroyed by accusations she couldn't initially prove false. Then Webb's defense attorney, Harold Crenshaw, rose for cross-examination. Alexander felt his jaw clench as Crenshaw approached the witness stand with the predatory smile of a man who specialized in destroying credible witnesses. Dr. Thompson, isn't it true that you are facing enormous pressure to deliver results for your investors? We are focused on developing treatments that could save lives, Olivia replied evenly. And when your research hit obstacles, when your funding was threatened, didn't you see the Blackwood merger as a convenient way to steal the patents you needed? No. Come now, Dr. Thompson, a brilliant woman like yourself, backed into a corner. Facing the collapse of everything you'd worked for, wouldn't theft seem like a reasonable solution? Alexander saw the moment Crenshaw overplayed his hand. Olivia's eyes flashed with the same fire he'd seen in corporate boardrooms. The warning sign that someone had underestimated her intelligence and was about to pay for it. Mr. Crenshaw, let me explain something about scientific research, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never doubted her expertise. Stealing patents doesn't just mean taking ideas. It means stealing years of failed experiments, countless iterations, the specific knowledge of why certain approaches don't work. It means understanding not just what succeeds, but why everything else fails. She turned to address the jury directly. The patents Mr. Webb stole weren't just our successful discoveries. They were our mistakes, our dead ends, our learning process. No one steals the failures unless they're stealing the entire research pathway. And that level of theft requires access to our complete databases, our internal communications, our most secure files. Crenshaw shifted uncomfortably. That's speculation, Dr. Thompson. No, Mr. Crenshaw, that's evidence. Evidence that your client had complete access to Thompson Technologies' intellectual property through the merger documents William Blackwood shared with him as a trusted business partner. The courtroom stirred as Olivia's testimony landed like a precision strike. Alexander felt a surge of pride watching her dismantle the defense's strategy with the same brilliant analytical mind that had first captivated him. When Alexander was called to testify, he faced his own moment of reckoning. Taking the stand meant publicly betraying his father's business partner, destroying relationships that had defined his entire life, admitting that his privileged world had been built on lies and exploitation. Mr. Blackwood, Prosecutor Peterson began. You've had access to Blackwood Enterprises, internal communications regarding the Thompson merger. Can you tell the court what you discovered? Alexander looked across the courtroom and saw his father sitting in the gallery, his face a mask of cold fury. William Blackwood had attended every day of the trial. It's not to support his son, but to watch him destroy the family legacy with his testimony. I discovered that Marcus Webb had complete access to all merger documents weeks before they were finalized. He knew the exact timeline of the deal, the specific patents involved, and the security protocols Thompson Technologies used to protect their research. And what did Mr. Webb do with this information? He used it to steal Thompson's intellectual property. It triggered a federal investigation to destroy both companies' credibility so he could acquire their assets at bankruptcy prices. The testimony continued for hours, Alexander, methodically, destroying Webb's defense with financial records, email communications, and meeting schedules that proved the elaborate conspiracy. With each piece of evidence, he felt the weight of his old life falling away, replaced by something cleaner and more honest. During a brief recess, Olivia found him in the courthouse hallway. How are you holding up? Alexander glanced toward the gallery where his father sat, surrounded by lawyers and supporters. "I keep thinking about what you said about some things being worth more than money. Any regrets?" He turned to face her fully, this woman who had challenged him to become better than he'd ever thought possible. Her face showed the strain of months under federal investigation, but her eyes held the same fierce intelligence that had first caught his attention. More than that, they held trust in him as a man worth loving. "Only that it took me so long to figure out what actually matters." Before she could respond, they were called back to the courtroom for closing arguments. The prosecutor painted a clear picture of corporate greed and betrayal. While Webb's defense claimed the evidence was circumstantial, the product of two companies trying to deflect blame for their own failures. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood with the gravity of someone announcing history. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit corporate espionage, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of patent theft, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of securities fraud, we find the defendant guilty." The courtroom erupted as Marcus Webb was led away in handcuffs, his corporate empire crumbling in real time as his stock price plummeted. Alexander felt no satisfaction in watching his godfather's destruction, only relief that the truth had finally prevailed. 6 months later, Alexander stood in the same converted warehouse where he and Olivia had first planned their counterattack against Webb. But now the space hummed with different energy. Thompson Technologies had been fully exonerated, their assets unfrozen, their research vindicated. More importantly, their cancer treatment had passed Phase 1 human trials with unprecedented success rates. Olivia emerged from her lab wearing jeans and a Thompson Tech sweatshirt, her hair in a messy ponytail, looking nothing like the corporate executive who had descended those museum stairs a year ago. She looked like herself, brilliant and passionate and completely unguarded. "The FDA fast-tracked our approval," she said, her voice bright with excitement. "We could have treatments available within 18 months. Alexander pulled her into his arms, spinning her around the warehouse floor as her team cheered from their workstations. When he set her down, she was laughing, her face radiant with the joy of someone whose life's work would finally reach the people who needed it. "There's something else," he said, suddenly nervous in a way that billion-dollar negotiations had never made him feel. "What?" He dropped to one knee right there in the middle of her laboratory, pulling out a simple solitaire ring that had cost him more of his remaining savings than he cared to calculate. Around them, the warehouse fell silent as every researcher and programmer stopped working to watch. "Olivia Thompson, a year ago our fathers arranged a marriage between two people who barely knew each other. But I'm not proposing to you because of corporate mergers or family expectations or stock prices." His voice carried clearly through the vast space. "I'm proposing because you taught me the difference between existing and living, because you showed me what it means to fight for something bigger than myself, because I love the brilliant, fierce, uncompromising woman you are, and I want to spend the rest of my life worthy of that love." Olivia stared down at him, tears streaming down her face. "Alexander Blackwood, are you proposing to me in my own laboratory? Is that a problem?" "Only if you expect me to say anything other than yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, the warehouse exploded in cheers from her team. But Alexander barely heard them. He was too focused on the woman in his arms. The woman who had cost him everything he thought he wanted and given him everything he actually needed. They were married 3 months. Later, in a small ceremony in her parents' backyard in Palo Alto, surrounded by scientists and researchers rather than Manhattan society. Alexander's father didn't attend, but Charles Thompson walked them both down the aisle, officially welcoming the son-in-law, who had sacrificed his fortune to save his daughter's company, as they exchanged vows they had written themselves. Alexander realized this was what an authentic luxury experience actually meant. Not the perfectly curated life he'd built around wealth and status, but the messy, complicated, utterly real love of a woman who challenged him to be better every single day. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander kissed Olivia Thompson Blackwood in front of their chosen family of dreamers and innovators, surrounded by the technology that would save countless lives. It was nothing like the corporate merger their fathers had planned. And everything like the love story neither of them had expected to find. As they danced to their first song as a married couple, Olivia whispered in his ear, "No regrets about walking away from your empire." Alexander looked around at the celebration, the colleagues who had become friends, at the woman who had become his everything, at the life they were building together based on purpose rather than profit. "I didn't walk away from my empire," he said, spinning her under the string lights her team had hung in the trees. "I just built a better one." 5 years later, Thompson Blackwood Biomedical had revolutionized cancer treatment, saved over 1 million lives, and built a corporate culture based on innovation and integrity rather than exploitation. Alexander served as CEO while Olivia led their research division, partners in business as well as life. Sometimes, late at night in their home in the hills above San Francisco, they would talk about the arranged marriage that had brought them together and the choices that had kept them there. They had started as enemies, become allies, discovered love, and built something more valuable than either of their fathers' empires. They had built a legacy worth leaving to the world. The end.